Hi guys, welcome to the Watch Hobbies channel with me, Wayne, and today we're going to look at the new Tudor GMT from Baselworld 2018. I'm going to be looking at all the things I dislike, unfortunately, some of the things I like, and then I'm also going to be comparing it to these two. So obviously we've got the Rolex Pepsi here and my Rolex two-tone as well. So I just want to bring those into it because of various aspects. So this Tudor GMT was a watch that I was really excited about. I've wanted it since the second I saw it. I thought it looked fantastic in the pictures, and I have to say that I am a little bit disappointed. I really didn't want to say that, but I am. It's nothing against the watch, it's just the fact I think we all get through different stages in our watch collecting, but I think if you were just going out to buy your first premium watch, you would be hard pressed to beat this. I will say that. And I'd also say that if you wanted a one watch solution for everything, then you also probably can't beat this. But for me personally, I just have some different perspectives and different views on it, purely because I own the GMT from Rolex and I see that as the one to beat. And for me, this just doesn't beat it. So I'm going to go into why. There are some things that this watch has that beat the Rolex, there's no doubt about it. But for the most part for me, I'm just a little bit disappointed. I'm going to start basically with the first time you sort of see this watch. Now when you see it in pictures, you can never tell anything from pictures, which is why it always annoys me when, like just with the announcement now of the Ultraman from Omega, people are already moaning about the blob on the dial and stuff like that. Now, I always think it's better to reserve judgment until you actually handle something and see it. And the reason I say that is because I have done it so many times where I've moaned about something and said that that looks rubbish, or I don't like this, or I don't like that. I've ended up owning something down the line or handling it and thinking, no, I was completely wrong. And it's because pictures don't do any justice. It's a 2D image. It's very highly touched up in most cases. There is actually a video of Rolex, who like the designers of the Rolex Daytona advert, where they touched it up, and it's like in fast forward, and it still goes on for something like half an hour. You know, these watch pictures are all very highly sort of processed to make them look at their absolute best. And the Tudor is no different. You can tell from the lighting and the images on the website how much it's been sort of processed and you know, and made to sort of have no reflections going on and things like that, whereas you can see straight away as soon as you look at the watch there are reflections, but they're actually not too bad. But there's basically just a lot of differences. So I think the best thing first is to talk about the similarities. So obviously we have the two watches here side by side. We have two Pepsi bezels apparently. Now yes, they are kind of red and blue. The Rolex is known that it's a much lighter red towards a sort of more plum hue, and the blue is known to be more like a purplish hue, and that's only in certain lights, because believe me, when you get a sunny day it actually looks very blue and very red. The Tudor, according to their website, is actually burgundy instead of red, and it's blue as blue is, but at the same time when you actually see the blue in reality it's actually a very dark blue, and it goes to almost black in certain lights. So this is something that you need to be aware of. They actually call it burgundy. It's not red, and it's you know, it is a true dark burgundy colour. So again, not quite as the old Rolexes are, which people are saying this is like a modern day version of the older 5-digit Rolex GMT. It's really not, and it's not for a number of reasons, including its dimensions. But it's similar, and it's a Pepsi bezel. The thing that I dislike in terms of the burgundy is that it doesn't match the red hand. So you've got the red GMT hand there, but that's a very different colour to the red of the bezel, the burgundy of the bezel. So I think they should have tried to get that a bit closer. At least the red on the Rolex does sort of, in some lights, actually look exactly the same, whereas it just doesn't at all on the Tudor. Now, the other similarities are, of course, the 70-hour power reserve, which everybody talks about. Now, that's actually something that's great. Don't get me wrong, it's always nice to have more and more power reserve in the watch. But it's also not something that applies to absolutely everybody. Some people will buy this and they will wear it every single day. And because you're wearing it so often, your power reserve doesn't even mean anything much. So it depends on your personal choice of watch. You know, as to your lifestyle. And if this is watch that you're going to sort of wear during the week, but then wear something different at the weekend, it makes a lot of sense, because over the weekend it's not going to power down, and then you pick it back up after like Monday morning after the Friday night that you stop wearing it, and then fine, it's still going to be running. So it makes sense in that case, and it is really good to have the extra power reserve. But it's only the same on paper in terms of the movement as the Rolex. In terms of reality, I would imagine they are quite different underneath. I don't know too much about the anti-magnetic properties of the Tudor, but I know on the Rolex they are pretty much second to none. They're very, very highly anti-magnetic, the Rolex movements. They have parachrome hairsprings and things like that. The other similarities are going to be things like just the usual sapphire crystal. Back to the movement, you've got the COSC rating, so it's probably going to be around about 0 seconds accurate, maybe 2 seconds or so either way, but you know, hopefully somewhere towards 0. And the other thing as well that they are very similar in is build quality. I can't knock the build quality, and especially for the price point, this is absolutely fantastic in terms of its overall build, its feel. It just feels like it will last forever, and there is no doubting that. However, there are a lot of differences between the two watches. The first thing, like I say, that stood out to me was the overall shape, dimensions, weight, which I'm going to show you. The second thing was the dial. I'm not a massive fan of these smaller hour plots on the dial. I really wish they would have been a bit bigger, and I'm really sorry to knock this watch. And you know, I know everybody likes it, but I have my own opinions on it. And for me, I just really like the maxi dials of the Rolex. I really think they look awesome, and I wish they'd kind of done that on the Tudor. The other thing as well with the dial is that all the hands and the hour plots have green lume, so the fill that we see within them it glows green at night. Now don't get me wrong, green can actually glow brighter than the Cerachrome that we see on the Rolex, which is like an aquamarine sort of blue colour. But I just think the aquamarine colour looks so much better when you've got a blue bezel section. So it's a bit like the old Rolex Yachtmaster, the 5-digit one. It always had green lume, and I never thought it looked good. And then finally they brought a blue version out with the 6-digit ref, and that had a blue dial and blue lume, and it just looks so much better. And it's not about when it's pitch black, because you're not going to see the details of the watch, but say you're in a cinema and you can see just the ambient light hitting the watch and you can see the colour of the dial, or say that it's almost pitch black outside but not quite, you know, you can still see a bit of the dial or a bit of the bezel in this case, and the blue lume with the blue of the watch just looks awesome at that time of night. So I really, really like that, and I think that they should have just put the blue lume on. Obviously they can do it, they've got it in the Rolex company, and they've also got it in the Pelagos, so I don't know why they didn't go with that. It looks very white, the dial dots, you know, and things like that. So it wouldn't have really changed the look in the daytime, but it would have just changed it at night. So I wish they would have done that. The snowflake hands don't bother me. I actually really like them. I think they're a good trademark of Tudor, just like the Cyclops of the Rolex. But again, another point of contention, not everybody likes that. And as a result of me liking those, I think that's actually a really good design element. The date is also really easy to read, but there have been some initial issues with this watch, and apparently the date sticks halfway, and the only way to really, that you seem to be able to test it, is to sort of stick it to around about 9 o'clock and wait for it to go past the 12 marker, so like 3 hours or so, and then see if the date changes over properly. That seems to be the only way to do it. It doesn't seem to do it any other way. Even if you were to set it at like 11:59 and wait for it to tick over, it doesn't seem to work that way. So actually finding out if the watch has the issue is a little bit difficult. So just be aware of that. I'm sure it's not every single one of them, but there do seem to be a few people on the forums that have had this issue and are noticing it and have had to return the watch back into Rolex. But that's the good thing. I mean, you've got a great dealer network. They will sort it out quickly, I'm sure. Always try and go direct, I find, if you have an issue. If you can go to Rolex directly in your country, it will be probably more beneficial. I just don't like authorised dealers handling my watches. I've heard a few horror stories, and I've had a few issues of my own in the past. If I hand it direct to the horse's mouth, I know it's probably going to be better looked after, and no charges are going to come into place or anything, even delivery charges or whatever. So that's something, you know, with the dial, I think that stood out to me. Like I say, the hour plots are just a little bit small for my liking. I kind of like the Rehort, like that's inside the disc that's inside the Tudor, because it doesn't have any of, obviously, Rolex going all the way around it. I do like that that's smooth. It kind of sort of reminds me of the older watches, and I do like that. But you know, that's something that maybe will change at some point. Maybe we'll put Tudor or around about that. But the main thing that I just can't get on with, though, is the size of the watch. It's so much bigger than I expected it to be. So I had heard people say that it's in the Black Bay case, but the thing is, I haven't had a Black Bay for many years. I actually started off my channel with a Black Bay. And I remember the reason I sold it was because it was just too big for my wrist. Now this watch, funnily enough, doesn't seem to wear too big on my wrist. It seems to sort of hide its size a little bit, but because I've had the Rolex GMT, that's the difference. So if I hadn't had a Rolex GMT, I'm sure I would be over the moon with this watch, because it's fantastic, and for the price, nothing, or it's very hard to beat for the price, shall we say. However, I think the only way I can really show you the size of the watch is to actually sort of show you with my calipers here. Okay, so I've got a caliper, and I've also got my girlfriend's scale here for what she weighs food with and stuff. So there we go. Right, I'm going to show you the weight first. Okay, so I think it surprised me, so hopefully it'll be a little bit surprising to you. And I think it's also probably not been shown before because of having these three watches here. It's quite unique. So I've got my scale here set to 0. Okay, so we'll just check it's working. Yes, it's absolutely fine. Back to 0. Right. I'm going to put the Pepsi Rolex on first. Okay, so the Pepsi Rolex, if I leave that. Now, one thing I want to say, so that's 136.5, it seems to have settled at. 136.5, this watch and the other two are sized to my wrist. So I have around about a 6.75 inch wrist. I have sized them all. These are not the weights that you would get straight out of the box, because obviously the extra links would be involved there. But saying that, the GMT here only comes with about 1.5 extra links to what I've taken out anyway. So it doesn't come with a huge bracelet for some reason, that watch. So that's 136.5 we've got. Okay. The next one, I'm actually going to put my bimetal. So these links here are solid gold. Okay, it has solid gold bezel, and it has gold blasted into the bezel as well for the numbers, and it also has gold hands and things like that. So gold weighs a lot, gold crown as well. There's some gold in the clasp. So gold weighs quite a lot, so therefore I would expect this to be heavier than the Pepsi Rolex. And if I place it on here, we can see there 158 grams. Okay, so obviously that was always going to be the case. Sorry, I've just knocked the camera. That was always going to be the case, that it was heavier than the Pepsi Rolex. Okay, so the Pepsi GMT. Now if I take this off and I put the Tudor on, okay, now this is a steel watch. It has an aluminium bezel, and it has no gold, nothing like that. Okay, I'm going to pop this on there, and it's 169.5 grams. Okay, so that's, to me, quite a bit heavier than I expected, and it's around about 30 grams or plus over the Pepsi Rolex. Okay, so I think that's quite a big weight difference. The next thing, of course, to look at is the measurements. So I'll do it in the same order. Obviously I don't need to measure the two-tone in this case, but I'm going to do just straight across the watch, because it's just easier. It saves fiddling about with diameters and possibly getting it wrong. If I just get that straight across, around about 44 millimeters from the from the right hand side to the left hand side, basically the far extremes. Okay, so 44 millimeters. Okay, so that's what we've got there. And then in terms of length, we have got 47.8, is that? So yeah, around about 47.8. Okay, and then in terms of height, I'm not going to count the Cyclops, but let's see if we can just get that on. So around about 12, just over 12 millimeters, 12.2. Okay, now the Tudor, so across it's what is it there, around about 44.5, so not too much difference there, barely any difference in fact. The differences really start to come in when we're talking length. So length is 50 millimeters. Now that doesn't sound a lot, of course. 48 millimeters to or less than 48, but to 50 millimeters sounds like nothing. But remember, this is a watch. Watches are small devices, so you go add in a couple of millimeters in, that can start to make it the difference between wearability on a small wrist versus no wearability. So if you've got a larger wrist, neither of these will be a problem to you. But if you have a small wrist and you're going to struggle, I tend to find that 50 mils tends to be about the maximum I can pull off. 51, 52 tends to look ridiculous on my wrist. So that's how tight the differences are when you've got a small wrist. So if you're watching this thinking, oh, there's no difference there, but there is. If you've got a small wrist, it does make a difference, trust me. I found out way too many times at too much expense that it's not, you know, to say it's not a difference. So that's that. So a couple of millimeters there in the length, but the main difference really I think is probably going to be the thickness. So if I do it without the bezel, without the crystal, sorry, the crystal is a domed sapphire crystal. Okay, so 200 meters water resistant watch, so it has to have sort of quite a hefty crystal on there, 12.87. But if I then take into account with the crystal, let's try and get that bang on the middle. Yeah, 15 millimeters or so. Okay, so there's now a good sort of 3 millimeters difference really in terms of the height of the watch. So again, small device, so therefore 3 millimeters makes a big difference. And also because this watch is so sort of slab-sided, you know, it's really just straight down the sides, it also, because of the design of it, makes it seem even larger. Now don't get me wrong, it actually wears on my wrist quite well. I'm going to show you a wrist shot, of course. It wears well, I don't mind the way it wears, but compared to the Rolex, that's the difference. So like I keep saying, if this was just my only GMT watch here and I didn't have the other two, I wasn't fortunate enough to have those two, then I would absolutely be singing the praises of this. The size of it wouldn't particularly matter. But the fact that the Rolex GMT exists, and the fact that I've got one or two in this case, I think that's where my difference is coming in here. And that's just why I'm a little bit disappointed, because I was hoping it'd be more svelte. And like I say, I was hoping that it would be more the size of a Black Bay 58, and it's I've not seen a 58 yet, but from what I've read with dimensions of those, they seem similar to sort of like the 5-digit Submariners, which was one of the best case designs ever. So if they're around about that size, that is a fantastic sort of overall dimension to go with, and I really hope at some point they put this GMT movement in that. That is when it will be an absolute 100% winner. But as it stands right now, I just think it's a little bit too big overall for me, even though I like the way it wears. Because I've had the others, that's what's making me sort of think it's just a bit too big overall. And it's just little things like that, which they are little, and these are all first world problems, but that is what's making me think I'm not so happy with this watch. However, when you start to look at the prices and the fact that people still seem to think they can just walk in and get one of these Rolex GMTs, you just can't do that anymore. The world has changed, and there's no doubt about it. And I hate it as much as the next person, but at the same time, you know, it's just the way it is now. People are happy to buy these things on the secondary market, spend absolute fortunes on them as well. Some people will laugh at them, but at the end of the day they still get the watch that way, which they maybe couldn't have got any other way, and they want the watch so they buy it. So that's why the prices are like they are now. But when you actually get this watch in your hand is when you need to decide if you like it or not. I've seen a lot of people say to, on forums that they don't like the Jubilee bracelet. Well, let me tell you that I have worn this watch in many different environments. This two-tone here. It has the standard oyster bracelet, and I absolutely adore this watch. For everybody, not everybody's going to like the two-tone gold. I know there's a new version now that has the brown bezel. This has now officially got the older movement. But one thing I will say to you is that I have never ever noticed before my wrist get clammy. I've never noticed it. It must have done, but I've never noticed it. We have had recently in the UK a bit of a heat wave. It's been 30 odd degrees quite often. That's not been uncommon, and that's really unusual for the UK to have such a long summer. They're talking about a summer that's as good as the one we had in 1976 before I was even born. So that's how much of a different summer this has been. And believe me, with the Jubilee bracelet, I've literally not had any issues at all. I didn't even realise until I put my gold one on, and that's got obviously solid links which don't have the same kind of airflow. And that's when I realised how fantastic this Jubilee bracelet is for sort of airflow and hot environments and things like that. So it really is a spectacular watch and a spectacular bracelet. The bracelet on the Tudor, however, is probably very similar to the Rolex, to the two-tone GMT, and as a result of that, I would imagine is still a bit clammy, although it does look like the gaps are slightly bigger, so maybe the airflow would be a little bit better. But I just think, overall, for me, this watch has just missed the mark for a few reasons. First of all, I keep talking about the dimensions and the weight. Okay, that is one thing. Second of all, the small dial plots. That's something I'm not a great fan of. Thirdly, the way that the watch tries to look modern but vintage at the same time. That's one thing I mean, great, it's not got faux loom like the 58 has, and I don't think I'm going to like that. I've not seen a 58 yet, but I doubt I'm going to like it, but we'll see when I actually see the watch. Great, it's not got faux loom. I'm really pleased about that because it's not trying to be a previous model, but that's just it. It's not trying to be a previous model. I don't think there's ever been a Tudor GMT in the past, but yet it's got the rivet bracelet. It just feels like they couldn't be bothered putting its own bracelet on there, which it should really have the standard Black Bay bracelet in my opinion. It shouldn't have the rivet one. I don't know if they still actually even do a non-rivet one, thinking about it, because I'm not really that up on Tudor. But I know when the Black Bay first came out, it didn't have a rivet bracelet. This rivet bracelet first came about on I think is it called Only One auction or something like that, where basically manufacturers are asked to make one watch that only one exists, and then they auction it for a huge amount of money to go towards charities, and it's a great event. But that's when the rivet bracelet, I think, first came about, and then it appeared on the Tudor Ranger as well and stuff like that. And I just think it's trying to look really sort of old school, but this wasn't a watch that you would find in a vintage version of, because it never existed as far as I'm aware. So I don't like that aspect of it. I don't like the colour of the loom. I wish they would have made it blue. Why didn't they make it blue? Because that would have set it out. It would have made it stand out just a little bit. They can definitely do it because, like I say, the Pelagos has got it. Even better if they could have made the bezel illuminated in some way. Then it starts to make so much sense, because you've got this illuminated bezel, just like the Grand Seikos, where you can see the GMT time even at night and stuff. There's just certain little things that I'm not a fan of. The fact that it's 200 meters water resistant, and therefore all the extra heft of the case and everything, just unnecessary. This could have been a 100 meter water resistant watch without a doubt. I really wish they'd done that. So, oh, and one last thing, sorry, it's missing, which I've not really spoken about. So it's all down to the bracelet again. It's the clasp. So I do not like particularly how the clasp has been sort of produced, and it's not the quality. The quality is incredible. Genuinely, like, this feels so solid. It has ceramic ball bearings and things like that going on. It really does, you know, sort of nail the quality aspect. But if I open the clasp, one annoying thing is that the fold over bit here can get stuck. So you go to put that down, and obviously you could actually hit that with that and start to scratch it. So I hate how it does that, whereas the Rolex one just sort of flops about but still is super secure, because I think the ceramic bearings are actually on this part of the clasp on the Rolex. I could look, but I'm not sure. The other thing as well is that I actually always struggle to get a comfortable fit on a Tudor. They don't seem to allow you to take too many links out that easily. And one thing for me is that I'll show you, and I've actually done a video on this, which I'm not sure if it will have gone out by now. But basically I want the clasp so it's in the centre of the underside of my wrist. And when you go to remove the links, you can actually only remove one link in the normal manner, and then the clasp is now a link over, so it'd be starting around about here. I hope you can sort of get what I mean by this. So I want the clasp where it is now. I've managed to get it to where I want it now. But if I just took one link out of this side, it would be one over. So there is actually a trick, which I'll show you in another video, to make that happen. But it's a bit fiddly, and I ended up scratching the watch by mistake when I was trying to do that. The links themselves, they do have screws, so they're a 1.4mm screw for anybody that wants to buy a specific screwdriver. I always recommend you get yourself a good set of screwdrivers so you can adjust links yourself. I prefer it over letting somebody in a shop do it, because I've had a few watches scratched in the past, so I've got my own screwdrivers these days. 1.4mm screw, and it's basically a long screw like it is in the Rolex bracelets. But you know, it's just things like that. Also, this clasp doesn't have any extension other than the typical sort of pin adjusters, which hopefully will show up. So you have to actually use a tool to extend it, which you're not going to do on the fly. You know, you probably could pop a pin out and then lose it wherever you are. It's just not practical for every day. So you kind of have to just set it, and then if your wrist swells up in the heat, then you just have to deal with it. If your wrist then contracts, then again, just have to deal with it. The watch will then flop around a little bit because it's quite a heavy watch head, as we know. So all this being said and done, with no extension, no easy link type extension, no dive extension, even though it has a diver's watch rating, there's just a few little juxtaposed things that just tend to bug me a little bit, and it's just like it could have been the perfect watch and then they just missed the mark slightly. But I think the whole reason for that is, let's face it, the price point. It's still way better than most watches in a similar price point. Certainly better, I think, than anything Omega currently offer. There's no GMT that they offer that is this price and as good as this. And they would tend to have a 60-hour power reserve over your 70, so it wouldn't last a full 3 days type of thing, if that matters to you. So there's loads of great things to this, and I don't want to come across as moaning, and I probably have, but I don't want to come across as like really calling the watch. It's a great watch, don't get me wrong, but I do think that there's just a few things that hopefully in the future, on the next iteration of it, will just be attended to, and then we will have the perfect watch that's at relatively reasonable money. You know, it's the type of watch that if you didn't have the money to go and buy, you could get on even a finance package, and it wouldn't cost you too much per month to own, and you would own a beautiful watch that could last you for the rest of your life and beyond. So I'm really sorry if this was a bit of an unusual video. You know, I don't normally go into so much detail, but I think the fact that I had all these here, I just really wanted to show you what I thought the differences were and what I felt sort of needed to be said about this model. So thanks for watching. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Please make sure you hit the bell icon so you know when I am next going to release another video, and also make sure you have a look at my Instagram, which is @WatchHobbyist. You can see these watches and more. And finally, if you like the video, please make sure to hit the thumbs up button, and please make sure you comment if you have any things to say. Thanks. I will see you again very soon.